Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Hollywood has never seen a feud quite like the one between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. It wasn't just icy glares and snide remarks, it was an all-out war that spanned decades. The hostility ignited in the 1930s when Crawford allegedly stole Davis's love interest, actor Franchot Tone. Davis had fallen hard for Tone while filming Dangerous in 1935, but Crawford swooped in, reportedly greeting him at her home wearing nothing but a smile. Soon after, Crawford and Tone were engaged, leaving Davis humiliated and seething. That resentment simmered for years, but it boiled over when the two were cast in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962. The set became a battleground. In one scene, Davis kicked Crawford with such force that Crawford needed stitches. Crawford retaliated in her own way, filling her costumes with weights, making it nearly impossible for Davis to lift her during a crucial scene. And when Oscar night rolled around in 1963, Crawford got the last laugh. Davis was nominated for Best Actress, but Crawford, who wasn't even nominated, schemed her way onto the stage by offering to accept on behalf of other nominees. When Anne Bancroft won, Crawford strutted past to stun Davis to collect the award, basking in the spotlight that Davis so desperately wanted. Even death couldn't end their feud. When Crawford passed in 1977, Davis delivered one final cutting remark. "You should never say bad things about the dead, only good. Joan Crawford is dead. Good." Their rivalry wasn't just a Hollywood catfight. It was a masterclass in grudge holding, a public spectacle that set the gold standard for celebrity feuds. Frank Sinatra and Marlon Brando. Frank Sinatra and Marlon Brando were two titans of entertainment, but when they collided on the set of Guys and Dolls in the mid-1950s, it wasn't just a clash of talent. It was a full-blown war of egos. Sinatra, the king of cool, had little patience for Brando's method acting, dismissing him as a mumbler who took himself too seriously. Brando never wanted to back down from a challenge, decided to make Sinatra's life miserable by deliberately botching takes, forcing old Blue Eyes to redo scenes he despised. The tension was palpable, and their disdain seeped into every frame of the film. Sinatra, a seasoned singer, refused to perform live on set, while Brando, who had no formal training, insisted on doing just that. Another way to needle his co-star. Their rivalry didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Years later, Sinatra took jabs at Brando's weight gain, mocking his once chiseled features. It was a feud that embodied the old-school Hollywood divide, the effortless crooner versus the brooding artist. Elizabeth Taylor and Debbie Reynolds. Hollywood has seen its fair share of scandals, but few were as explosive as the love triangle between Elizabeth Taylor, Debbie Reynolds, and Eddie Fisher. In the late 1950s, Taylor and Reynolds were the epitome of Hollywood glamour and, more importantly, best friends. That is, until Taylor fell into the arms of Reynolds' husband, the singer Eddie Fisher. The affair sent shockwaves through the industry, not just because of the betrayal, but because Fisher, once a beloved crooner, left Reynolds and their two children to marry Taylor in 1959. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Fisher's career never recovered, while Taylor, already a tabloid fixture, was labeled a homewrecker. But Hollywood loves a comeback, and so did this story. By the 1970s, Reynolds and Taylor had mended fences, even joking about the scandal in later interviews. Reynolds' ever-the-class act admitted that despite the heartbreak, Taylor was the love of Fisher's life. A tale of betrayal, redemption, and the kind of drama only old Hollywood could deliver. Marilyn Monroe and Laurence Olivier. When Marilyn Monroe and Laurence Olivier teamed up for The Prince and the Showgirl in the late 1950s, it should have been a match made in Hollywood heaven. Instead, it turned into a battle of egos, acting styles, and simmering resentment. Olivier, a classically trained Shakespearean powerhouse, had little patience for Monroe's method acting, which often meant endless takes and personal struggles bleeding into the performance. He wanted efficiency. She needed emotional connection. Monroe, already battling insecurity and personal demons, was hypersensitive to Olivier's cold, dismissive attitude. He saw her as unprofessional. She saw him as patronizing. The tension boiled over when Olivier, exasperated, called Monroe impossible to work with. Monroe, in turn, refused to ever collaborate with him again. Their feud mirrored the later clash between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Two titans forced into proximity, each unable to respect the other's approach. But while Davis and Crawford's rivalry was fueled by personal vendettas, Monroe and Olivier's was a war of artistic philosophies, proving that sometimes even the brightest stars can't find common ground. Joan Fontaine and Olivia de Havilland. Hollywood has seen its fair share of feuds, but few were as deeply personal and long-lasting as the rivalry between sisters Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine. From childhood, their relationship was marked by competition, with Fontaine once recalling that de Havilland would physically dominate her, even breaking her collarbone in a fight. When both pursued acting, the rivalry only intensified. Fontaine's career took off first, and in 1942 she won an Academy Award for Suspicion, beating out de Havilland, who was also nominated that year. The moment should have been celebratory, but instead it became a symbol of their fractured bond. As Fontaine extended her hand to congratulate her sister, de Havilland allegedly ignored it, turning away in what many saw as a cold dismissal. The tension between them never truly eased. Fontaine later quipped, "I married first, won the Oscar before Olivia did, and if I die first, she'll undoubtedly be livid because I beat her to it." True to form, when Fontaine passed away in 2013, de Havilland remained silent, refusing to acknowledge her sister's death publicly. While Hollywood thrives on drama, few rivalries were as enduring and deeply rooted as this one. Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. In the golden age of silent cinema, two names towered above the rest: Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. Both were masters of physical comedy, both revolutionized film, and both were locked in an unspoken battle for the throne of silent film supremacy. But while Chaplin became a global icon, Keaton's career was often overshadowed, a fact that never sat well with him. Keaton, known for his stone-faced brilliance and death-defying stunts, resented Chaplin's total control over his films, while Chaplin, ever the perfectionist, saw Keaton as a formidable rival. Their competition played out in box office numbers, critical acclaim, and the shifting tides of Hollywood's favor. Chaplin's sentimental storytelling and signature tramp character made him beloved worldwide, while Keaton's deadpan genius and technical innovation earned him the admiration of filmmakers, but not always the commercial success he deserved. The rivalry wasn't just professional, it was personal. Keaton struggled with studio interference, while Chaplin wielded total creative control over his work. When the silent era gave way to talkies, Keaton's career faltered, and Chaplin, though facing his own struggles, remained a dominant force. But fate had a cruel sense of irony. In the early 1950s, when Chaplin was exiled from the United States due to political controversy, he made the film Limelight, and in a surprising move cast Keaton in a minor role. It was the only time the two legends ever shared the screen, a poignant moment that should have been a grand meeting of equals, but instead felt like an afterthought. Keaton in later years admitted he admired Chaplin, but wished he had been given more opportunities. Their rivalry, like so many in Hollywood, was fueled by respect, resentment, and the ever-present hunger for greatness. Tallulah Bankhead and Bette Davis. If Hollywood was a battlefield, then Tallulah Bankhead and Bette Davis were two generals locked in a war of artistic dominance. Bankhead, the sultry, whiskey-voiced stage actress, had long accused Davis of lifting her mannerisms, her husky delivery, even the way she carried herself on screen. Davis, never one to take criticism lightly, fired back with a verbal dagger, dismissing Bankhead as a second-rate actress with a first-rate ego. Their feud simmered for years, but it reached a boiling point in 1950 when Davis starred in All About Eve. Bankhead, who saw more than a little of herself in Davis's razor-sharp performance, made her disdain public, slamming Davis's portrayal as a pale imitation of her own work. Yet behind the venom and the barbs there was an unspoken truth. Each woman secretly admired the other's talent. They were two sides of the same coin, both larger-than-life figures who refused to be overshadowed. Errol Flynn and David Niven. At one time, Errol Flynn and David Niven were the epitome of Hollywood camaraderie. Two dashing leading men who shared a love for adventure, laughter, and the finer indulgence of life. But while Niven carried himself with a refined charm, Flynn's reckless abandon knew no limits. His excessive drinking, wild womanizing, and often self-destructive antics became too much for Niven, who had ambitions beyond just being a swashbuckling playboy. The tension boiled over when Flynn began mocking Niven's attempts at serious acting, sneering that he was too proper for Hollywood. Niven, who had worked hard to establish himself as more than just a charming rogue, grew resentful of Flynn's dismissiveness. Their friendship, once unshakable, eroded under the weight of Flynn's chaotic lifestyle. By the time Flynn passed in the late 1950s, their bond had never truly mended. It was a classic case of two men who had started on the same path but had ultimately taken wildly different roads, one towards self-destruction, the other towards longevity. Their fractured friendship mirrors modern Hollywood fallouts, like the rumored tensions between Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire, where differing career ambitions and personal choices strain once close relationships. Louis B. Mayer and Judy Garland. Judy Garland was just a teenager when Louis B. Mayer took control of her life. As the head of MGM, Mayer saw her as a gold mine, a voice that could melt hearts and a face that could sell tickets. But behind the dazzling Hollywood facade, Garland was trapped in a machine designed to keep her profitable. Mayer dictated everything, from her diet to her schedule, forcing her onto a relentless cycle of work, pills, and impossible beauty standards. She was given amphetamines to keep her energy up and barbiturates to bring her back down, a dangerous routine that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Garland resented Mayer's control. She was no longer just the wide-eyed girl from The Wizard of Oz. She was a woman who wanted autonomy. But every attempt to push back was met with resistance. Mayer wielded his power ruthlessly, using emotional manipulation to keep her in line. He would allegedly tell her she was unattractive, that she owed everything to him, that without MGM she was nothing. Their relationship was a constant battle, with Garland fighting for freedom and Mayer tightening his grip. By the late 1940s, the cracks were impossible to ignore. Garland's mental and physical health were deteriorating, and her once unshakable work ethic was faltering. She missed rehearsals, clashed with directors, and struggled under the weight of expectations. In 1950, MGM finally had enough. After years of wringing every ounce of talent from her, they dropped her. Just like that, the studio that built her up cast her aside. But despite everything, Garland later admitted that he had shaped her career, for better or worse. Without him, there would be no Judy Garland as the world knew her. It was a toxic, complicated relationship, one that defined an era where studio heads played puppet master, and stars were merely assets. In many ways, Garland's struggle with Louis mirrors modern conflicts between artists and the industry machine, where control, exploitation, and power struggles still dictate careers, just under a more polished veneer. Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster. Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster weren't just Hollywood's toughest leading men, they were also each other's fiercest rivals. On screen, they played everything from gunslingers to military officers, but off-screen, their egos clashed like titans. Douglas, ever the scrappy underdog, resented Lancaster's influence in Hollywood, while Lancaster, with his effortless charm, saw Douglas as overly ambitious and, at times, exhausting. Their rivalry wasn't just professional, it was personal. On the set of Gunfight at the OK Corral, their competitive nature boiled over constantly. They'd push each other to deliver better performances, but sometimes the jabs got too real. Burt, towering over Douglas, often teased him about his height, once joking at a fan event that Douglas wore lifts in his shoes. The remarks stung so deeply that Douglas, in front of an audience, broke down in tears. Yet for all their feuding, they shared a strange, deep bond. Despite their clashes, they kept coming back to work together, drawn to their shared intensity. When Lancaster passed away in 1994, Douglas openly mourned, calling him a giant. Even years later, Douglas admitted, "We fought a lot, and I miss him a lot." Their relationship was never simple, but it was undeniably legendary. Two Hollywood titans locked in a battle of talent, ego, and grudging respect. James Dean and Paul Newman. In the golden age of Hollywood, few rivalries burned as intensely as the one between James Dean and Paul Newman. Both were rising stars in the early 1950s, young actors with smoldering intensity and undeniable talent. But while Newman had the classic good looks and polished charm of a leading man, Dean was the wild card, a brooding rebel who brought raw emotion to every performance. Their paths collided in 1954 when both auditioned for East of Eden, the film that would ultimately catapult Dean to stardom. Director Elia Kazan was searching for someone who could embody the tortured soul of Cal Trask, and both Dean and Newman wanted the role. Their screen test together was tense. Dean, unpredictable and electric, delivered his lines with an almost reckless vulnerability. Newman, by contrast, was controlled, deliberate, and self-assured. The contrast was striking, and the friction between them was palpable. Newman reportedly found Dean's erratic energy frustrating, while Dean saw Newman as too polished, too conventional. In the end, Kazan chose Dean, setting the stage for a rivalry that would never fully play out. Just a year later, Dean's life was cut short in a tragic car accident, leaving Newman to step into the spotlight he might have otherwise had to share. Over the years, Newman admitted that despite their differences, he respected Dean's immense talent. Their brief but fiery competition remains one of Hollywood's great what-if stories. two icons forever linked by a role that only one of them got to play. Sophia Loren and Jane Mansfield. Picture this: a glamorous Hollywood party in 1957, filled with A-list stars, flowing champagne, and flashing cameras. In walks Jane Mansfield, the ultimate blonde bombshell, draped in a dress so low-cut it defied gravity. Across the table, Sophia Loren, already a rising international star, locks eyes on the scene. And then, the moment that would become one of the most infamous photographs in Hollywood history, Loren, caught mid-glare, eyes fixed on Mansfield's dangerously plunging neckline. The press had a field day, spinning the image into a symbol of an alleged rivalry between the two actresses. But was there really bad blood? Loren later set the record straight, admitting she was shocked by Mansfield's antics, but insisting there was no personal hatred. Still, the media painted them as rivals. Mansfield, the provocative American sex symbol, and Loren, the elegant European beauty. The supposed feud never escalated beyond that dinner table, but the tension was enough to cement their names in Hollywood lore. And when Mansfield tragically passed away in 1967, Loren expressed genuine sadness, proving that sometimes the biggest feuds are just myths spun by the flashing lights of the tabloids. Orson Welles and William Randolph Hearst. It was the ultimate showdown between a media titan and a cinematic genius. When Orson Welles released Citizen Kane in 1941, the world saw it as a thinly veiled attack on newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. The film's protagonist, Charles Foster Kane, bore an uncanny resemblance to Hearst. His rise to power, his lavish estate, even his obsession with controlling the narrative. Hearst was furious. He wielded his empire like a weapon, banning any mention of the film in his newspapers and pressuring theaters to refuse screenings. Hollywood executives, fearing Hearst's wrath, distanced themselves from Welles, effectively blacklisting him. But Welles never backed down. He refused to apologize, standing by his vision despite the career setbacks. Decades later, Citizen Kane is hailed as one of the greatest films ever made, while Hearst's attempt to erase it only cemented its legend. Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich. They were two of the most enigmatic women in Hollywood history. Greta Garbo, the elusive Swedish star, and Marlene Dietrich, the sultry German icon. But were they rivals, or was there something deeper beneath the surface? The whispers started in the roaring 1920s when both actresses were rising to fame. Some claim they had a brief but passionate romance in Berlin before their Hollywood days, a claim that Dietrich vehemently denied. "I never met her," she insisted, but others weren't so sure. Garbo, famously private, refused to acknowledge Dietrich at all, fueling speculation that something had happened between them, something that left a lasting wound. The tension only grew when both became global stars, with Dietrich embracing the spotlight while Garbo withdrew into mystery. Their supposed feud wasn't the usual Hollywood catfight. It was a silent, lingering Cold War, where neither woman spoke about the other, yet their names were forever linked. Even today, the truth remains elusive. Were they lovers turned enemies, or was it all just a myth, a carefully crafted Hollywood illusion? The mystery of Garbo and Dietrich endures, an unsolved riddle from the golden age of cinema. Lauren Bacall and Marilyn Monroe. Lauren Bacall and Marilyn Monroe were two of the most iconic actresses of Hollywood's golden era, but when they shared the screen in How to Marry a Millionaire in 1953, their differences clashed in a way that made headlines. Bacall, known for her sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude, found Monroe's work habits infuriating. Monroe, often plagued by stage fright and insecurity, would arrive late to set and require dozens of takes to nail a scene. Bacall, a consummate professional, reportedly called her exasperating and resented the constant delays. But Monroe had her own grievances. She felt Bacall looked down on her, dismissing her as just another pretty face rather than a serious actress. The tension between them was palpable, yet, despite their feud, Bacall later admitted that Monroe had an undeniable screen presence. It was a battle between discipline and raw magnetism, a dynamic that played out in front of and behind the camera, leaving a lasting mark on Hollywood lore. Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly. In the golden age of Hollywood, two men reigned supreme on the dance floor. Fred Astaire, the epitome of elegance, and Gene Kelly, the embodiment of athleticism. But while audiences adored them both, behind the scenes their styles and philosophies clashed. Kelly, with his bold, muscular movements, saw Astaire's refined, ballroom-inspired technique as outdated. Astaire, on the other hand, viewed Kelly's approach as too forceful, lacking the grace and subtlety he had spent a lifetime perfecting. It wasn't a personal grudge, but Hollywood, always hungry for a rivalry, pitted them against each other as the dueling kings of dance. The industry loved a good showdown, and the contrast between Astaire's tuxedo-clad sophistication and Kelly's working-class dynamism was too tempting to ignore. Yet, despite the competition, there was mutual respect. In 1945, the two finally shared the screen in Ziegfeld Follies, a moment that wasn't just a performance, it was a truce. Watching them dance together was like witnessing two masters acknowledge each other's genius even as they remained worlds apart in style. Their rivalry may have divided Hollywood, but in the end, it only elevated them both to legendary status. Jane Mansfield and Mamie Van Doren. Two blonde bombshells, one Hollywood battlefield. Jane Mansfield and Mamie Van Doren weren't just rivals. They were locked in a high-stakes war for the spotlight. Both were seen as Marilyn Monroe lookalikes, but neither wanted to be anyone's shadow. Van Doren, known for her sharp tongue, accused Mansfield of blatantly copying her style and even stealing her publicity stunts. And in a town where image was everything, that was a serious offense. The competition wasn't just about looks. They fought for the same roles, the same headlines, and the same adoring fans. But more often than not, Mansfield came out on top, landing the juiciest parts while Van Doren watched from the sidelines. Their feud reached a fever pitch in the late 1950s, with each trying to outdo the other in the race for Hollywood's most provocative starlet. Yet despite the animosity, Van Doren later admitted that Mansfield's tragic death in 1967 hit her hard. The rivalry may have defined their careers, but in the end there was a grudging respect, one blonde bombshell mourning the loss of another. Charlton Heston and Kirk Douglas. Hollywood has always been a battlefield of egos, but few rivalries were as intense as the one between Charlton Heston and Kirk Douglas. Both men were larger-than-life figures known for their commanding screen presence and their roles in sweeping historical epics, but behind the scenes their relationship was anything but cordial. The tension between them exploded when Douglas, already a Hollywood powerhouse, had his sights set on the lead role in Ben-Hur, a film that would go on to define an era. He wanted it badly, believing it would cement his legacy as the ultimate leading man, but the studio had other plans. The role went to Heston, a choice that infuriated Douglas, and he didn't keep his frustration quiet. While Douglas never publicly admitted to being bitter, those close to him knew he saw Heston as a rival who had stolen what should have been his crowning achievement. Adding fuel to the fire, their differences extended beyond the screen. Douglas, known for his rebellious streak and progressive politics, saw Heston as rigid, conservative, and self-righteous. Heston, on the other hand, embraced the image of the noble, larger-than-life hero, even quipping, "I've played 3 presidents, 3 saints, and 2 geniuses. If that doesn't create an ego problem, nothing does." Their rivalry was a clash of ideology, ambition, and sheer willpower. And yet, despite their friction, both remained titans of Hollywood, forever compared and forever at odds. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.